We want to welcome everybody back. This is the State of Our World, where we discuss topics such as political topics, social topics, and how they relate to the Christian and the Bible. With me today is James, and I'm Alan, and today we're going to discuss one world government. And I think James has a question here to get started.
Well, the idea of a one world government really has piqued a lot of interest, and it's historically been something that's been kind of batted around, and in fact leaders overseas have spent a lot of energy and in fact have tried to conquer the world. You have in fact, if you go all the way back to Babylon, was a world empire, and it really started with Babylon, because Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar was really expansionist. But then every succeeding empire after Babylon, you have Medo-Persia with Cyrus, and then later on with Darius. Each succeeding empire went a little larger and a little larger. By the time you get to Alexander the Great, Alexander really pushed out the edges of the Greek Empire, and the Greek culture. A lot of our culture today is influenced by Alexander the Great, and then you have Rome, and then you have certain individuals who really tried to conquer the world. You have Napoleon Bonaparte, who was from France. Brilliant. And then you have, most recently, you have back in the late 1930s and 1940s, you have Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And he even predicted that the Germans would conquer, and there would be 1,000 years, the Third Reich. And so really this idea of a one world government has really piqued the interest of a lot of people. And so today I think it's vital to look at the elements behind a one world government and say, is it good? Is it bad? And how does this relate to God and His kingdom? Mm-hmm. And especially as it relates in the Bible. And I think it's going to be a fascinating topic. So today I think we're going to get into some of this. We're going to talk about the history of world governments. And so Alan, why don't you share with us a little bit about the League of Nations? How did that come about? And just kind of bring us up to speed here.
Well, it started with World War I, which ended in 1918, basically. And by 1919, they had discovered that, hey, we need some way to bring all these nations together so we don't have another world war like we had in World War I.
And why is that? What happened in World War I that really galvanized, it really projected them to have this League of Nations? Because World War I was this catastrophic.
Very destructive.
Very destructive. They had nerve gas. I mean, it was an all-out slugfest.
They had the machine gun by then, and they were killing people quicker. And so they realized, and it was worldwide. They call it a worldwide war, World War I. And so they said, we have to get together. We have to get all these nations together so that this never happens again. But it did.
Yeah, so it didn't work. Something broke down, huh?
Yeah. So what they came up with was, at that time, was the League of Nations right after World War I. Sure. And a lot of people thought that was going to work. All the governments of the world were going to come together and they wouldn't have another world war. But when Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan came on the scene and they had this other world war, then they came up with what we call the United Nations right after, or toward the end of World War II. And the United Nations, they thought, might be a world government, some way to control all nations so we never have another world war. Now, the membership of the United Nations is not a membership of elected individuals. And most people don't know that. These people were appointed Our representative to the United Nations is an appointed person by the president that goes to the United Nations. And it is not a legislative body. They don't make laws. They have an advisory role. And so people say, look at the United Nations and they say, oh, man, this is not working out very well. We need something with a better, more power, has teeth, so that they can control different nations. We won't get into this war again. So the purpose of it is to foster cooperation between different national governments rather than exert authority over them.
Yes, and I think part of that is protective because, you know, and this has been in the news recently because, you know, President Biden has been talking about if one of the members of the United Nations becomes attacked, then you attack one, you attack them all. And
yes, kind of like the European Union.
Or European Union. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh.
So here you have this association of different entities, different governments, but again, like Daniel's prophecy, they're trying to come together, but they're really not able. It's unequally yoked type marriage.
Well, they just don't have authority.
Right, they don't have an authority.
In fact, I can remember I had an employee that was in Africa when Uganda was going through all this trouble, and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were being killed. And he was with the United Nations troops. And he said, well, we just stood by and watched. We just watched it happen. So the United Nations really doesn't have the authority to go in and stop wars.
Yeah.
But they would like to. A lot of people would like that. Now, within the United Nations, there's what they call the League of Democratic Nations, which supports a federation of nations, meaning a government over the entire world. Go ahead.
So as we're looking, they're definitely looking towards the future. They're saying, look, you know, what we have here, yeah, it kind of works a little bit, but we need something that's more proactive, something that, like you said, has teeth in it, has muscles, it can actually accomplish something. And so there's another term that's been used, batted around again, called the Great Reset. How did this terminology come into our vocabulary?
Well, this has been the desire of the World Economic Forum and its chairman, Klaus Schwab, for decades. And he's wanted to bring the world together like this. King Charles, before he was coronated and became king, he gave a speech promoting a great reset based upon COVID-19 and its problems. We have this problem all around the world with this COVID-19 that could destroy everybody. So we need all of the nations together in one organization. And of course, the World Health Organization wanted more power, and it was kind of knocked down by the United States. But there is an attempt to bring in a great reset.
Now, when you say great reset, pardon my mental image, but I'm thinking of a computer that's frozen up. You know, you push any button and nothing happens. The only thing you can do is, you know, hit that start button, hold it down for 5 seconds, and it resets. Is that kind of the general idea of the reset? Let's start over. It's not working. Let's start it again.
Well, the plan basically came out around June 2020, and it was that global capitalism should be transformed so that corporations no longer focus solely on serving shareholders, but become custodians to a society created by stakeholders, shareholders, stakeholders.
What's the difference?
Shareholders in a corporation are gaining money or
Right.
wealth, and so they have some say in what's going on.
Right. I've purchased so much stock in this company, therefore I have authority in what happens in that company.
Right. I have an interest there.
An interest.
And the World Economic Forum is based a lot on that, trying to control what's going around the world economically because of the financial interest. So the shareholders, they feel that's what's kind of controlling our economy and everything now is the shareholders, but the stakeholders would be just the common people. What are they getting out of this? So what you have here is talk of socialism. They use these same terms. So they say that we need a global governance, and that would be in the form of the World Economic Forum says, hey, we're going to meet and we're going to talk about this world government. We need unity around the world. We consist of one central government body with supreme sovereignty. In other words, the other nations couldn't control it. They would control the nations. While administrative subdivisions might exist, their powers would be delegated by the central government. In other words, the powers in these other countries would be delegated by this central government. And what they're saying is that we would like power to control all the governments of the world, but they would have their own national governments as well. And they may be electing officials and so forth, so that would be a democracy. A very interesting concept. It is similar to the concept of the Chinese government.
In what way?
Well, you have people at the top who have supreme authority, and they kind of control
Oh, they do.
what's going on under them in the smaller governments.
I've been in China.
Yeah.
I know that they do.
You live there.
The governments own the money and the resources to be able to gain money, and so companies and people can own small little on a local level. They can own like a shop or something like that. The government doesn't
and they
care
vote
about
for
that.
the local city officials.
Right.
And so
But when
forth.
you talk about big corporations, government owned.
Right.
Government owned, because that which controls the economics controls the country. That whoever holds the pocketbook controls. It works in families too.
Right.
When you have a person who owns controls how money is spent. That's why families get into
And
battles.
this World Economic Forum would include CEOs of companies as well
of
as representatives from the different countries all come together to control. This is not new. We've had what we call the Trilateral Commission. And David Rockefeller, I believe, was the one that founded that. And he says, we are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order. And I've heard that in politics, that take advantage of a crisis.
Yeah.
So we had the COVID-19 crisis, and this was at the front of their mind. So King Charles stood up as a world figure, a very strong world figure. Just recently he was coronated, but he said these things in June of 2020.
Okay.
And so his objective to his speech was that we must combat not the health, but global warming.
Wow.
So now we're getting into some other issues. So there are several issues that we'll discuss here that bring about this need for a one world government, according to them.
Yeah.
And, the World Economic Forum, this Klaus Schwab was the president of that. He says the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world.
Ooh.
And so they talk about resetting the capitalism around the world. They want to change it.
Sure.
And we look at China and we say, yeah, there's capitalism there. They call it a democratic society. Interesting. And they feel that they are involved in capitalism. And we say, well, that's a communist country. And you can see we need to get into a discussion here of all of these definitions.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Schwab, Klaus Schwab rather, says, the changes we have already seen in response to COVID-19 prove that a reset in our economic and social foundations is possible. This is our best chance to insignate stakeholder capitalism. So when they say stakeholder capitalism,
Right. It's not capitalism. It's
not
socialism.
Right. It's socialism.
That's a code word for socialism.
And he says, and this is how we can achieve this. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economics, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Now, what is he saying there? Education, in other words, bring up our young people so that
Right.
they accept this, they demand this.
And it's already happening.
Yeah. And social contracts has to do with the obligation of the citizen to the government.
Right.
So there will be a change there.
Mm-hmm.
And working conditions, you're talking about unions. It says every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry, from oil to gas to tech, must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism.
Right. And when he says reset of capitalism, it's not starting over capitalism, it's throwing it out and bringing in a new form, another form, which is, socialism 2.0.
Controlled from the top.
Yeah, controlled from the top.
We'll have companies, they'll have CEOs, but we will control this from the top.
Right. And things, lest you think that this is just, pie in the sky, things are happening.
Yeah.
Things are happening. And we need to be wise, as Jesus said, wise as serpents, harmless as doves.
And it's the term that is used is global federalism.
Global federalism.
Global federalism. Or world federalism.
So, talk to me a little bit about more the ideology of world federalism. What is this?
Yeah, it's a federal world government, like we've been mentioning, that they say is democratic.
And when you say, I mean, when I hear terms being thrown around, you can play very fast and loose with terms. I've heard, being a person who's worked around Christians and non-Christians, I've heard people who are not Christians say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian." Please explain. What does that mean to you? Because we need to define our terminology. You can say you're a Christian. I can say I'm a Christian. What is it that makes me a Christian? What is democracy? You're talking about the word democracy, and they say, "Oh yeah, we're democratic."
Yep.
Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, and they throw that around. Does it mean that it's really by vote of the people?
Yeah.
And Republican form of government would mean we vote people to represent us.
Right. The power resides in the people, not the government. The government serves the people.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that the Communist Party USA, and you can read about their ideology in a paper called Road to Socialism. You can find that. You can go to CPUSA on the internet, and you'll find that. But it's interesting that they want democracy worldwide. Communist Party says, we want democracy worldwide.
And what do they mean by that?
We want it'd be like China, like Russia. Russia says it is a democracy.
Right. But everyone knows that there's one person at the top, and that's Vladimir Putin.
In fact, in 1997, they came up with a new constitution, and it looks very much like the U.S. government, the way it's set up. But somebody got into power and kind of took the reins, and that kind of ended the government that they were looking for. So And we know what's going on over there today in Ukraine and how that whole world is being affected. But Russia is, they call it a democracy.
Sure.
China calls itself a democracy. And it's interesting. So this World Federation, they said, it'll be a democracy, and we would have authority on all global issues.
Sure.
So any global issue, we have the authority.
So let me pause right here and let me say, when somebody proposes an idea like this, a one world government where there's global power, there's global authority, how do they justify this? What kind of advantages would they say, this is going to be advantageous because of these reasons?
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, that's a good one. For example, the one at the top now is climate collapse. They say there's an emergency with the climate change, and we need to do something about it. And the only way we can do this is have a worldwide government to control this.
Now, the term climate collapse, I've heard climate change, but now it seems like the rhetoric has been ratcheted up to another level. Collapse. Collapse means, you think of a person who's just tottering, about to fall over, and so on. Climate collapse. How are they painting this picture?
Well, there were many that said back in the 80s that the world would not last past the year 2000. It's interesting. I'm going to throw this in. Jay Leno said, wow, they're saying today that it's worse than they ever thought. He says, that's pretty bad since nobody was supposed to be alive past the year 2000. So there are people that were a little bit going overboard on their predictions. And but climate is the first one on the list.
What else?
They need all the nations together. Then poverty, some expected, I heard a statement, somebody said that by the mid-80s, 1980s, that 4 billion people would die of starvation. Well, now we talk a little bit about redistribution of wealth around the world. We've got wealthy countries and poor countries. We had back in, I remember during the Obama administration, they wanted to tax the wealthy countries because they were producing more pollutants and give the wealth to the third world countries. So this has been in the works for quite some time, redistribution of wealth. Then they figured that if they had a worldwide government, they could control what people are saying, control thoughts.
No longer freedom of the press. You can just, you have to, it's almost a thought police.
Right. They're saying we can't make this happen because there's too much misinformation and disinformation. The difference is misinformation is a misunderstanding of what's really going on, and then you put that out to the public, for example, on the social media. Disinformation, they say, is a total lie.
It's intentional.
To try to reach some other goal. So they would like to control that. Another reason for control is nuclear, the nuclear war threat.
Yeah.
So they have had...
that's very real.
Right.
Very real. I mean, even as recent as the Ukraine war, this big rattling the nuclear saber, it's continued to happen. And so, the risk of nuclear war, it can reduce a one world government, at least the idea is, reduce the possibility that that somebody destroys millions upon millions of people with a push of a button.
Right, and they had an organization called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but not all countries accepted it. They didn't want to be controlled that tightly, and I can understand that too. But so it's been tried.
Sure.
And another thing, the reason for the control is they have a summit coming up where peace activists this is the World Economic Forum, where some of the peace activists will discuss nuclear risk reduction, disarmament, and initiatives to use common security approaches to replace the reliance on nuclear weapons and have a weapon-free world. Now, what is common security? What is security?
Yeah.
Police, somebody walking around with a gun, you know.
Yeah, so these are all definitions that, again, you can throw out all these terms, but how does it play out? How does it define?
Yeah.
That's the real question.
So you had another question.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about proposals for the establishment of the World Federation.
Yeah. So they've been working on this to establish this World Federation. Some say, well, we could reform the UN and use the existing platform to put some teeth into it.
A facelift.
Uh-huh. And the second one, they say, well, we could have incremental changes in the UN.
Mm-hmm.
No, they try to do that with other things. You can see gun laws, you know, that little bit here, a little bit more, a little bit, incremental changes. Another one is within the UN, there's a League of Democratic Nations, which supports a federation of nations. And maybe put this under the UN, but have another organization in there with a little more power. Another proposal was to just redirect and reform the UN Charter altogether. Go back to the beginning. So some say, what about using existing global institutions, bring them together like the World Trade Organization? And there are you said that finances kind of control
Oh, it does.
the world.
It does.
So they're talking that way too. And I think they're going to use a combination of these things. And another thing they have talked about is to establish an Earth Constitution.
And what is that?
Well, the Earth Constitution really started about 1968 and was finalized in 1991. And it outlined a plan for a world federalist government that and an organization called the Earth Constitution Institute. They've met probably about 14 times. And so they say that they need a world constitution and parliament association. And so by parliament they say somebody that can make laws. And laws, of course, would have to be enforced.
So here, you know, what you've just shared, Alan, with me is all these different organizations. It seems to me like kind of a tug of war back and forth.
Yeah.
You have different organizations pulling one way or pulling another way. You have different world governments pulling one way or pulling another. If it was so easy to make a one world government, it would have already happened. Clearly, there's some problems in the works.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is, you know, there's some wrenches thrown into the whole machinery. So what are the problems? What holds us back from, you know, doing the Great Reset, having this streamlined one world government in which all of this takes place?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing they talk about is there are powers in the world that want domination. They accuse the U.S. of wanting world domination. Russia recently has been pushing China, Islam even in their religion. Some of them talk about dominating the world. So what do you do with these different groups? How do you handle them? It takes cooperation to bring about this one world government, coordination, international trust. And then we have the problem of economic competition. We have countries and their tax policies trying to control imports, exports, production, and different countries may have plans to control the distribution of wealth. And so all of this would have to be across the board. All these countries would have to come together on some of these things. And they also say the inability to control social media. How are we gonna control people's thinking and get them to be
Sure.
loyal to a world government if we have the social media putting out all this stuff?
Yeah. So clearly there's number of different things that just kind of mire it all down. But something, they're definitely making some inroads, making some progress. But one of the things that keeps cropping up is this issue of disinformation.
Yeah.
This is something that, especially as we saw in COVID, was huge, because, and in fact,
Right.
as they began to talk about, what was scientific in this whole issue of COVID, they finally, the powers that be said, look, we can only have one side of the conversation. We can't allow the other side to be able to speak because it's disinformation. And in fact, and so you saw that people who posted videos on YouTube, they were deplatformed. There's certain articles were not being able to make it to publication in scientific journals, and so on. So the topic of disinformation is huge.
Yeah.
And so talk to me a little bit about how this plays into this one world government.
Well, even the World Economic Forum has been advising governments to take control of this. And they say, there are people that speak out against climate change. They speak out against vaccinations, like you mentioned. They're for or against abortion. And even in our country, we have had some attempt to control social media. And you've seen it in some of the social media and the arguments taking place. Recently, I believe it was not Facebook, but it's the other one.
Instagram
Yeah.
or Snapchat.
Yeah. And they've been taking
Twitter.
information off.
Twitter.
And Twitter is kind of fighting that now.
Right, sure.
But there is some evidence that government leaders have been talking to them about this disinformation and try to stop it. So even in our country, this has happened. We hear about it in Canada, we hear about it in Ireland, we hear other countries around the world where they're trying to deal with disinformation.
The problem with disinformation is that what one person thinks is correct, another person may legitimately think is incorrect. Who has the right to say what is ultimately right or wrong, except that we have a robust dialogue? Anytime that I see people trying to shut down, deplatform, just trying to take the other person down, I say something's wrong with that.
Yeah.
Seriously wrong. And so so this whole disinformation thing, it strikes very close to home for me.
Yeah, and I'd say that there is a company over in the United Kingdom called Logically, and they have 200 employees that do nothing but detect, assess, and act on emerging threats and what's going on with this disinformation. They're starting to use artificial intelligence to quickly go through all of the media, the social media, and find disinformation and report it.
Well, that also raises some questions, based upon previous discussions that we've had about artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is obviously, it's artificial, and sometimes it gets it wrong.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it can help in some circumstances, but anyways.
It depends what is programmed into that, who they're looking for.
But my big concern is when we start to control information and how information is disseminated, have we really progressed that much further than what happened with Goebbels in Germany, who controlled the voice of Germany?
Yeah, another thing
you control the voice of Germany or any country or even the world, then you can control people's minds.
Right. And I was thinking of China again. You say you grew up over there in Hong Kong. Right now, the Chinese government is trying to rewrite the Bible and the Quran and make Jesus look like a bad guy so they can control the information getting out there. And in other words, the Bible is getting in there, so they want to control what the Bible says. That's an extreme.
So we have this tug of war going on, and again, it's back and forth, and there are real efforts, to pull this in a number of different ways. Now, there are nearly 50 organizations worldwide that are in favor of federalism.
That's right.
So, and which, do you know offhand which country those are? Or 50 countries. How many countries in the world? There's over 200, 200 and what is it, 30, 37 or something like that, countries in the world.
I was looking at a chart that showed various organizations in the Americas. And it looked like there were about 25 of them. Europe has a lot of them. And so there are various organizations in each continent. And it's kind of interesting that they're trying to bring all of Europe together. They were really angry when England pulled out.
Right, out of the
United Kingdom
Union.
pulled out.
Yeah.
Because I think in the background they were saying, this is against what we're trying to accomplish, bringing all the nations together into one government. And now they're talking about a federation in Africa, bringing those countries together. So there's been this talk all the way along, and there are a lot of organizations that want one world global government.
Yeah. And again, there's advantages. You see, on the one hand, there are some clear advantages. If you have, all of these issues, the societal issues or national issues, you can solve some problems, but it creates a whole set of other problems as well.
And our concern is that our ability to preach the gospel
Right.
is going to be...
Well, if you're controlling information, the government is controlling information. What happens if one day the government says, you know what, the Bible is hate speech. It's no longer allowed. You can't talk about the Bible. In fact, let's shut down the churches, anyone who meets in private homes, to talk about that. Or if you talk to your neighbor across the fence about Jesus, that reaches the level of hate speech. Because Jesus is no longer accepted.
I think some people liked the fact that during this COVID thing they had to shut down some churches. In New York, they were shutting down churches, didn't allow
the
people to meet.
casinos and the bars and those places were open for economic reasons. But boy, you couldn't even go to a theater with your windows rolled up.
Yeah.
In your car.
Yeah, now, there's the next point there.
So, Pope, as we talk about the changes in our world, there's one church, unified church, that has political as well as religious power. We call it religio-political power. And that's the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church stretches all the way back, and if you talk to the authorities today, the Catholic Church, they'll say it stretches all the way back to St. Peter. And so today, Pope Francis, who's the current pope, has written an encyclical letter. Maybe explain a little bit about what is an encyclical letter, and then talk a little bit about the encyclical that he wrote and its significance.
Yeah. Now, this is basically a statement coming from the church giving their position on an issue. And I would not say that he is a definite political power today, except in the Vatican. There's a country there.
Well, they are represented in the United Nations.
They're in the United Nations.
Yeah, no other religious entity has that level of recognition.
And he's trying to influence the rest of the world, to bring the rest of the world together. It's interesting in China. I'll throw this in. In China, the Chinese government appoints the top bishops in in the Catholic Church. And there is a cooperation there going on so that the church is accepted there in China because the government has some control. But anyhow, in this encyclical letter by Pope Francis, we could read it.
So what is it? What is the name of this encyclical?
It's called Fratelli Tutti. It's from the Holy Father Francis on fraternity and social friendship.
Sounds fairly innocuous.
Yeah, it sounds good. And he's calling for a single global authority with real teeth to prevent any nation or small group of nations from having too much power, he says. There should be the standardization of law worldwide. And those are his words. Now,
strong words.
Yeah. And what he says in this, I read through the whole thing carefully to try to determine what he was trying to push in this encyclical. And he's, first of all, a single global authority with real teeth to prevent any nation, like we said, or small group of nations from having too much power. And he says there should be standardization of law worldwide. He wanted to fight poverty and hunger. Doesn't that sound familiar with the World Economic Forum and
exactly?
He wanted equal pay for all workers. So you're getting into the unions. It's interesting in...
That's the term equity.
Yeah.
Equity. We're being equitable. Everyone's getting equal outcomes.
It's not equal opportunity like our Constitution says. It's equal outcomes.
Right, equal outcomes.
There's a big difference.
Big difference.
I listened to a guy in Europe talking, and he said, well, we were under communist rule. It was good. It was good for the lazy people. It wasn't too good for the hardworking people.
Yeah.
But anyhow, equal outcome is what they're talking about.
Sure.
And they also say we want to fight global warming. We want to fight pandemics. See, this goes right along with what these other organizations are saying.
And when was this encyclical letter written?
It was at the end of 2020.
Right,
Yeah,
October 3, if I'm not mistaken. 2020. So right in the smack dab middle of our pandemic, he's launching this big global, one world government document. Very fascinating.
Yeah.
So to fight pandemics, of course, it's fresh in everyone's mind. So yeah, this one world government is going to fight pandemics.
Yeah. And he says, we've got to defend human rights. Sounds good. Do away with national borders.
Ooh.
Stop racism.
Okay.
Fight the greed of capitalism. Because he's not really strong on capitalism. He talks about fighting for women's rights and stop religious persecution. That's interesting. And that he says there should be global socialism. Those are the things he's kind of pushing for. He says,
and I would say, Alan, probably the last one there, global socialism. Everything that he just mentioned before just leads up to this point. So he could have just made it in one point almost.
I know we're running out of time, but when you have global socialism or you have people that believe in social evolution, that we'll become a better and better society, it takes a strong government control to do this, to bring us into a perfect state, a utopia.
Yeah.
And then you have people out there saying, the world is getting worse and worse, and Christ has to come back to solve the problem.
Right.
That said, we got to shut these people up. We don't want to hear that. That's disinformation.
Right.
And so you can see where the Christian would collide here.
Exactly.
And he goes on to say, I would also note the need for a reform of the United Nations organization and likewise of economic institutions. It sounds like the other organizations. And international finance, see? So that the concept of the family of nations can acquire real teeth.
So when you say the term real teeth, we're thinking of something that is used to attack. Like, what makes a dog dangerous is its teeth.
Police force.
It can attack. It can bite. And when they say real teeth, they're wanting to bite anyone that is opposed to them.
Yeah. This other statement I like too. It says, the media can help us greatly in this, especially nowadays when the networks of human communication have made unprecedented advances. He's talking about the general media.
Oh, yeah.
We cannot accept a digital world designed to exploit our weaknesses and bring out the worst in people. See, we can't deal with that.
Can't go there.
He's talking about the social media.
Yep.
He says it is essential to devise stronger and more efficient, organized international institutions with functionarios that are appointed fairly by agreement among national government and empowered, notice that word, empowered to impose sanctions.
Ouch.
So
that's the teeth.
These are his ideas.
That's the teeth.
Yeah.
We're going to sanction. Anyone that doesn't go along, sanction.
Yeah. What's the next one on there? You have that written.
So as we're kind of wrapping down here, clearly Pope Francis is definitely pushing along with this federalist agenda. Let's get this on board. And unless you think that Pope Francis is kind of a small fish in a big ocean, he's really not. Because the worldwide there's they estimate over 2 billion. That's billion with a B. 2 billion Roman Catholics. Now, not all Catholics are on board with the Vatican, but he exerts not just influence over Catholics, but he exerts on a governmental level.
Yeah.
It's Pope Francis that is able to bring together these different world religions and draw them to the Vatican to talk. And trust me, he is doing that. He is pulling together all the, Buddhists, Muslim, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, all across the board. He's pulling these people together. And I can't think of another world religious figure that has that kind of level of influence as Pope Francis.
Yeah, there were some other statements there. You see, we can't restrict her mission, the church, to the private sphere. He's on the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world.
Right.
And he goes on to say, whoever or wherever the councils of nations come together to establish the rights and duties of man, we are honored to be permitted to take our place among them.
So it's kind of a divine right. They feel like they have come on the scene for such a time as this.
Right.
Kind of like, to borrow a line from the book of Esther.
So what does it say in the Bible about these things?
So let's turn to the Bible, because when we look at the book of Revelation, let's turn to the book of Revelation. You go to the end of the Bible, it's really going to talk about not just a panorama of Bible prophecy, but especially about the time of the end.
Right.
And you get to Romans chapter 17, you have something going on there.
Revelation
chapter 17. Did I say Romans?
Yeah.
Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17. So let's go to Revelation chapter 17, and let's pick some of this apart here as we wrap up here in the next 8 minutes.
Chapter 3. Verse 3. Chapter 17, verse
Revelation
3.
chapter 17 and verse 3. This is what it says. So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman. Now, historically, a woman represents a church. A woman, or a church, sitting on a scarlet beast. A beast in Bible prophecy represents a nation or a power, a world political power. So here's a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. And we think about a man who sits on a horse. Who's in control? Yeah. Well, usually it's the man that's in control of it, assuming that, like a cowboy or whatever, controls the horse. So this woman is a church, is controlling controlling this political power, and the scarlet beast was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads, 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple, scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, and having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication.
Let's go down to verse 12 now. What's
And
that
then
say?
let's look at verse 12. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast.
Mhm.
So here you have this woman. So unpack this a little bit.
And the next verse is pretty important.
Verse
too.
13?
Yeah.
These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast.
These will make war. And there's 14.
These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful.
So it's talking about rulers of the earth coming together, and they're being pushed or carried. This red beast could be the same one in Revelation 12, where Satan is this same head, 7 heads, 10 horns, red.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So he's behind it all,
Right,
and he's pushing these people to come together around the world. And it says they're attacking Christ. Well, they can't get him. He's in heaven. So what does he attack? His children.
exactly.
Because it says, and those that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So they're attacking his children.
And so again, this political, this coming together, this
Yeah.
conglomerate, if you will, is really coming together for the purpose of persecuting God's people. In fact, the woman, she's dressed with all of this gold, precious stones, pearls. She has a golden cup full of abominations, but she has a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots.
Mm-hmm.
This woman is very vile, very wicked woman, kind of like Jezebel in the Old Testament.
Not following God's commandments for
No,
sure.
not at all.
Now, Revelation 19:19, he says, I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and the armies gathered together to make war against him, Jesus, who sat on the horse, and against his army. So, again, they're attacking. It mentions the kings of the earth, just like it did in Revelation 17. There's something where they have to come together to attack God's people.
Right.
And we're seeing this in
And
prophecy.
ultimately, there is going to come this clash together to, this world government against God's government.
Mm-hmm.
God's government.
We see it in Revelation 16:14 also.
Okay, Revelation 16, verse 14.
Talking about spirits going out
Right.
to gather them. Go ahead and read that. Revelation.
So this is the
16:14.
sixth bowl. This is the
Yeah.
sixth bowl. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of demons, performing great signs, which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them together to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. This is the battle of Armageddon.
Right.
So this gathering together in one world government to fight.
By demons, which we talked about Satan being behind all this. He's the beast she's riding on is supporting her.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you come to Revelation 12, verse 17. And I know we're jumping around a little bit, but this is all linked together. Revelation 12, 17. And the dragon was enraged. Now, the dragon is the devil.
Right.
And Satan, and that old serpent called the devil and Satan.
I believe that's in 8 and 9 that talks about him being the devil.
And the dragon was enraged with the woman. This is God's true church. He went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Right. So, yeah. So what's the outcome, the final outcome? We know that Christ is going to be victorious. Now, this is a message that people that want to bring the whole world together don't want to hear.
Right.
They don't like to hear this, that Jesus is going to come back and solve the problem.
So the Revelation 20, this is where it climaxes. Revelation 20, you have Jesus' second coming. You have 1,000 years in which the saints are in heaven and the devil and his angels here on earth. At the end of the 1,000 years, the wicked are resurrected in one mighty army. They come together for one final clash. Again, this united attack, push to try to dominate the world. And then there's a great white throne judgment. And everyone, the book was open, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. And the sea gave up the dead. Death and Hades delivered up the dead. They were judged, and each one was judged according to his works. And everyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. And that is the final cleansing of this world by sin.
So what happens to God's people?
One world government.
Yeah, there'll be one world government under Jesus. Yeah.
One world government.
Perfect government.
And that's the best kind of government that there could be, is a one world government. You see, the problem with a one world government here on this earth is that, humanly speaking, we are sinful, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And so we cannot have a one world government here on this world, on this earth, and for it to be good. But in heaven, when you have the King of the universe, who loved this planet so much that he gave his only begotten Son, and came down, taking the form of a human, lived as a servant, as a slave, died as a slave on a cross, and was resurrected. You know what? I would be willing to serve that kind of a government.
And we must emphasize that during all this, God protects his people.
God protects his people.
You read Psalms 91. God will protect his people.
Yeah,
well, I think we'd better go ahead and close now. And we've had a good discussion. So we want to invite everybody to come back again when we have another topic and just sit into our conversation. So have a good day now.